Okay. In yesterday's session, we tried to see a basic struts project where the first step that we did was like create a dynamic subproject, then add some required libraries, okay, required libraries into this lib so that the project gets the features of struts framework. The next thing that we did is like created a web.xml, and in the web.xml we tried to create some configurations which will tell that from now onwards every request that will be coming into my application which ends with star.do or which ends with .do is a valid pattern which my action servlet will handle. And the next configuration that we did was like if suppose if I have multiple requests coming into the server, action servlet cannot handle all the incoming requests. Means it when I say it cannot handle, it means action servlet will not know what to do with all the incoming requests. The basic scenario is the action servlet needs to read a config file. Okay, the action servlet needs to read a config file so that the config file can go ahead and explain all the configurations to the action servlet. So the action servlet, based on the configuration, it can understand how to map an incoming URL pattern to a Java class. So from now onwards, we will call them as action classes. Okay. So let's start with the basic flow. The first one, in the login.jsp page. Okay, in the login.jsp page, I used certain tag libraries. See, the tag libraries are nothing but they help us in using struts predefined tags. Okay, struts predefined tags. The next thing is I say HTML prefix, HTML prefix as HTML and prefix as bean, so that at any point of time when I say HTML, it means that is a struts given tag. So I created a regular form like a HTML form and wrote the action as login.do and the method as post, and two text boxes, one for username and the other one for proper password, and then the submit button. Okay, now the next scenario that we did was when I click on this submit button, the request goes to the server and the request reaches the web.xml. In the web.xml, since it is a valid request, the request is handed over to action servlet. Now action servlet, when it gets the request, ideally it will not know anything, so we will tell the action servlet, hey, go ahead and read this config file. So it goes to this config file and it reads the configuration saying that if login comes, invoke this action class. Why I am calling this action class? Why? Because the current class is extending something called action. And the next one is register action. So there are two configurations that I made. If login comes, invoke this action class. If register comes, invoke this action class. So that is how the link is given. So now the next thing that I'm going to explain here is for time being, let's assume that I will be writing a set of statements. Okay, I will explain it later, like why I wrote that. Okay, I will explain it later. So the first thing that I will do here is I will just write a sysout in execute method is what I have written. Now my intention is to explain you or show you that whenever I click on a submit button, this execute method is must be called and this will be printed on the console. Let's try that first. Okay, now for this I will write some additional steps which I will explain later. So I will create a package com.easy learn java dot com.easylearnjava form. So in that, see the naming conventions that I'm trying to use. I'll create a class called login form, and in the login form I'm saying that it extends uh, action form. action form given by Struts framework. In this, let me create two variables like username and password. String username, password. Okay. Now this username and password field that I have added here are nothing but, maybe if you closely observe, uh, they are pretty much equivalent or similar to the two properties that I have created here, username and password. Okay. So I created a form. Okay. Now I will explain all these things like what I am trying to code here. And the next step that I'm going to do here is in the config file. One more additional configuration I'm doing, form beans, name equal to my login form, and oh, okay, just a small change here team, maybe a mistake that I did. It is not class name, this is type. My bad actually. That's what I wrote. I told a wrong tag actually. As soon as I wrote type here, I just figured out. So this is not class name, it should be type. Okay. So now here I say the type as com dot easylearn java dot form dot login form. Okay. As I said, just give me some time. I will explain once I show or execute this example. I will explain the entire flow. The exact same name what I gave at line number 11 is what I am trying to give at this location. Okay, my login form done. That's all. Okay, let me go ahead and run this one. And the other change that I will be making in my web.xml is here I will be using a specific tag called load on startup. Okay, load on startup equal to 1. That is what I write. Now, a quick question to everyone. When will an action servlet be invoked for the first time? My question. Excuse me. Okay, so if you understand my question, the question is like, when will the action servlet be invoked for the first time? Yeah, most of you told the right answer. So the answer is whenever we get a request called dot do ending with dot do for the first time, that is when the action servlet is invoked. So what happens is whenever the request comes for the first time, the action servlet will go ahead and read the config file, will understand all the configurations, and then will start calling all the classes or further URLs and all. So now whatever the time the action servlet will take to read the config file and to call understand everything and call might take, let us assume that it might take at least a second. Okay, so initially when you deploy your application for the first user, the request will always be slow, when the response will always be slow when compared to the next coming users. Why? Because if we don't write line number 25, okay, if I don't write line number 25, then action servlet will be invoked when a first request comes. But when I write line number 25, what will happen is the action servlet will be invoked during server startup. So the tag itself says that load on startup. So the tag will be, this tag will make sure that the action servlet is invoked during the server startup itself. Okay, so now the action servlet will not wait for the star.do, which means in my previous scenario the question was when will it be invoked for the first time. right? So in the previous scenario, the answer was only when start.do comes for the first time. But in this context, when I write line number 25, the action servlet will be invoked when you start your when you start your server means when you deploy your project in the server and start the server. That is when the action servlet is invoked. So what will happen in that scenario? When your action servlet is invoked during the server startup itself, the action servlet will read all the configurations and will understand every mapping. So whenever a user comes and sends a request, even for the first user, he will be means the response will be quick. Okay, is it clear like why we wrote line number 25? Okay, that's good. Now let me go ahead and run this project and explain some stuff. Let me debug it. Debug as debug on server. So finish, and let me place a breakpoint here. Okay, we got the login page. Let me enter some data. Means I'm not worried about whether it is a valid data or invalid data. I'm entering some data. Okay, and I'll hit login to my app. Did you notice here, team? As and when I gave or I try to submit the request from the browser, okay, the browser sends a request onto the server where the server ultimately calls the execute method and this sysout will be executed. Okay, so what is returned and all those things, not to worry about at this point of time. But the only thing that you need to understand here is the request came to this action class and executed the execute method. Is that so? It prints in execute method. So clear to everyone? Okay, very good. Now, the basic thing that we need to understand in this context is the MVC pattern, right? MVC pattern. Now, let me go back to yesterday's place where we try to see model view controller design pattern, right? So now, question to everyone: what is a controller in Struts project? What is the name of the controller? Yeah, very good. Action servlet is the controller in our project. Okay. So now I'll come back to this controller, but let me take the question, Ravi's question. Okay. So uh, the simplest answer that I can tell here, Ravi, is let us assume that tomorrow you're going to write an exam. Okay. So when you're trying to write an exam tomorrow at 10 o'clock, if I give you a notes and if I give you the question paper and if I tell that, hey, let us assume that you had never studied that subject till now. Okay, you never studied that subject till now. Now, if I give you a question paper and some answer sheet or some notes where all the answers are present, and I tell you like, hey, write down any 5 answers. So what you will do, you will read the first question. Then you will not sure where exactly that first question is present in the notes. So you will go through, search for that, and then you will, if you find it, once you find it, you will start writing. So is it time consuming or not? Which means like, will it take some time for you to go ahead and search or not for that specific question? Yes, right? Now consider a different scenario. So tomorrow again at 10 o'clock you are trying to write an exam. But what I will do is today itself I will give you the notes which has all the answers and I will tell you, hey, it has all the answers. Now what you will do is you will go through all the questions and tomorrow once you go to the exam and take the exam paper and say that once you read the question you will say that okay, this question is present in chapter 5 So let me open chapter 5 quickly and write down the answer. So in the second scenario, are you wasting any time in searching for the answers? No, right? That is the same concept that is happening when I say load on startup. So when I make my servlet ready during the startup itself, the servlet reads all the configurations, and when anyone sends a request, it immediately knows where to go. But if I don't load this server on startup, then first it needs to go to the config file, it needs to read all the mappings, which will take some time, and then we'll go to the actual class. So in order to make sure that to reduce that amount of time, we create a load on startup. Clear, Ravi? Okay, perfect. Now, the next thing is trying to understand model view controller. The controller is nothing but the struts given action servlet. Okay, controller is action servlet. So action servlet has a certain predefined set of steps which will go ahead and perform certain actions. Okay. So what is that controller doing? The controller will be controlling the entire flow in the application. Okay, we will see that step in an architecture diagram. We will see that later. Now, the next thing. What is a view in this project? Anyone? Any guess? View. Very good. View is nothing but it is a JSP page. So what is a view? Basically, view is nothing but something you can see, look and feel. So in this, what is that you can see? We can see a login page. We can see a success page, right? So the login page is nothing but a JSP, login.jsp, logout.jsp, success.jsp, register.jsp. In some other application, it can be a HTML page. In some other application, it can be an XHTML page. So the view is nothing but JSP pages in the current context. Okay. So controller and view, everyone is clear of that. Now, the most important thing is model. So what exactly is a model? Model is nothing but how you transfer data from the JSP page onto the action class and action class back to the JSP page. Okay. So in this scenario, I will show you some simple example of a JSP page itself. So in the JSP page, I will show some configurations. So that configurations which are predefined by the Struts framework itself will help us in achieving certain things. Okay. So let me explain model now. Okay. Let me explain model now. In a JSP page, login.jsp, I wrote something called property as username and the property as password. Now, if you notice, there are two fields that I'm entering in the UI and I'm sending it to the server. So, how many means not how many means the answer is like there are two fields which are coming to the server, basically the username and password field. Okay. Now, what exactly struts will do is struts says that hey, if suppose if the data that you are trying to uh, process, if it is an invalid data, when I say invalid data, it means let us assume that the user has entered blank spaces, or the user has entered only two characters for username or password or whatever, which in that scenario all you need to understand here is we should not process that request, which means if the data is invalid, data should not be processed any further. So the struts says that hey, I will separate out the logic which will validate the data and the logic which will try to process it. So let me show with a simple example here. So the first scenario, you say login.do, it comes to web.xml, it invokes it and it goes to the config file. Now in the config file, the first and the foremost thing that you need to understand here is action tag, where the path is login and the type is login action. Till here everyone is clear. Now there is one more class that I have created, which is nothing but login form class. Okay, and if you notice here, the login form extends action form. Action form is again a pre-defined class in Struts which will give you some functionalities. What is that functionality? We will see now. Okay, so if your class is extending an action form, your class, your login form class will become a form class, or it will act as a model in Struts framework. Now, what is the role of a model? What will happen is the most important thing here thing you need to understand. The first thing that I told here is how a JSP page is calling the action class. That is what I told. So now everyone is clear with those configurations. Now the second step that you need to understand here is how the data that I'm entering in the UI, okay, which means like, see, in the browser, when I enter some data, Raghu and secret, okay, when I hit enter, what will happen is the data that I am entering here will be bound to these parameters, username and password. Okay, so that what you can do is in action form, okay, in action form there is a method called validate. You can use that validate and validate the data here. Okay, so one quick question or one quick thing that I want to show here is, so if I go back to my servlets project, in the servlets project, when I enter some data on the UI, I and hit submit, it comes to do post. And if I want to retrieve the field data, okay, if I want to retrieve the field data, all I do is request.get parameter of uname and request.get parameter of upassword. This is what I told. So what is uname and what is upassword, team? Everyone? Exactly. They are the names given to username and password text boxes. Did you notice here? Exactly. Names given by us. Very good. In the JSP page, I'm just showing you the same thing once again. See, in the login.html, if you notice here, the explicit name that I gave is uname and this name is upassword. So in the request, I'm telling give me this uname and give me the upassword. In the old previous example, that is how you retrieve the data from the request. Okay, now understanding the same concept in struts. In struts, what will happen is you need not worry about all these things. The struts framework itself will automatically bind the data for you. Now, you might get a question or you might get a doubt. How exactly the struts framework is binding username exactly to this username and the password field data to the password property in this string? You might get a doubt. So the answer to that is Struts will do it internally. But for Struts to do it internally, how will a Struts know that? Why? Because let me show a scenario here. Let us assume that there is one more thing called as registration form. Okay, or else let me copy the same thing and paste it here. Register form. Now most of you might get a doubt, like means what I'm trying to explain here is the data entered in this JSP page, how is it coming to login form? That is what I'm trying to explain here. Now I'm trying to say that the struts framework internally will map that for you. That is the first thing that I told. Now again you might get a question that, hey, there might be many forms. Okay, then how will the struts framework will exactly match to login form.java class itself? And again in that, how will it exactly match the username to username field and password to password field only? That is what are the two questions. Now let us understand the first scenario. Out of all these form objects, how will it exactly call the login form only? Okay, so for that again I will go to my config file. So in the config file, just a while ago, there are certain configurations that I wrote. The form beans tag, okay, whatever classes that are extending action form, okay, whatever classes extend action form, they are all called as form beans in struts. So again, I declare all the form beans inside this form beans tag with a form bean. Now the other form bean that I can declare is form bean. What is the name? I can give my random name, any name. Register form or custom register form I gave, and the type that I am trying to give here is type equal to form dot easylearn java dot form dot register form is what I wrote. Now let me validate if this configuration is right or not. Press control, keep pressing control and hover my mouse on this. It became a link and I can go to that register form also. So the configuration is good. Now, the next question is, how come when, see here, the most important thing, when login comes, this class will be invoked, I know that, but how can the login form only will be called? That is what I did using this configuration. If you see the tag called name, okay, what exactly I wrote in this name is nothing but, see the highlighted part right now, my login form exactly matches to the name given at line number 11. So since both these things match, what happens is when this URL comes, this action class will be called and this form will be used. First question, is that clear to everyone? Like how only the login form will be called in this scenario? Yeah, I'll repeat it. Exactly, Sai. Same like servlet name, we are using very good correlation. Okay, so see here. The first thing everyone knows is when login URL pattern comes, this is the action class that we need to invoke. That is what is clear to everyone, right? Now the next one is I need to call a login form. Okay, I need to bind a model to this class, action class. Okay, I need to bind a model. So how can I bind this model? There are two model classes here, login form and register form. Okay, so there are two things, login form and register form. Now how can I call a login form in this scenario? Okay, the first thing that I say here is the login form means, since we wrote, I know that the login form is what I need to use, then how can I bind these two things? So for a login form, I'm giving a name as my own login form. Okay, now my question to everyone, when login comes, can I bind the login form to this request or not? Can I, instead of binding, I will just use one simple term saying that, can I use this login form with the current configurations, yes or no? Okay, so now the next question, why I cannot use? If I need to use, what are the changes I need to make? At what line number? At least tell me the line number where I need to make some changes. Excellent. The answer is line number 19. So at line number 19, I need to see at line number 19 when I say my login form, it will go and check for my login form. Is there any my login form? There is no my login form. So this configuration will fail. Okay, this configuration will definitely fail. So instead of that, what I will do is I will copy this my own login form. I will paste it here. Now is my configuration good? Yes or no? Awesome, very good. So now there are two things that everyone needs to understand. Based on a URL which is incoming, I can bind two Java classes together. One is an action class, one is an action form. So for every request, there is an action class and action form that I am binding. Okay. Now the next question, the next thing that we'll understand here is, now I am able to bind this form. The next question is, how come the username from the JSP page will exactly match to this username and password to password? The answer is, if you go back to login.jsp, okay, the property name that you are writing here is username and the property you are writing here is password. And Struts says that, hey, if you write the name, the property as username, write exactly the same name in the login form which extends action form. Write exactly the same name. If you do that, I can automatically bind the data. If you use a different name, I cannot find that parameter and I cannot bind the data. That is what it says. Now, question to everyone. The property that I have is username 1 and the password, the other property is password. And on the server side, it is username and password. Can the Struts framework map the stuff for me? Excellent. The answer is no. Why? Because it will look for a property called username1 on the server side on the login form.java, and it is unable to find out that exact property, so it will throw some error for us. Okay. So now is everyone clear? Like when login request comes, how only this form is called and how these things are mapped. Okay. Awesome. Very good. So the next step that I'm going to explain here is why we need a login form in between. That is the next step that I'm going to explain. So what exactly the Struts framework tells is, understand the flow here. Struts framework tells that once once a login URL pattern comes, then before going to action class, okay, before going to action class, I will take the control to login form class and I will validate the data, and if data is valid, then only I will go to this action class. If the data is invalid, I will not go to the action class. That is what Struts framework flow says. Okay. So see here team, the concept is pretty straightforward and simple. To put it in simple terms, it is request is sent to the server, data is being validated. If data is valid, then only process the request. That is the whole concept in Java in any framework. But here it says that go here, go there, use this, use that and all. So all we need to understand is, okay, is request coming? Yes, coming. Then where to go? Okay, this is where I need to go. Then what to do? Validate the data. If valid, what to do? If invalid, what to do? Like that. You need to understand the step-by-step flow, then it would be very easy for you. So the next step that I told here is we will validate the data in the login form. So for that, in the action class, there is already a method called validate for us. So what I am going to do here is I am going to use that validate method and I will try to override it. So I hope everyone knows the concept of overriding, where in the override concept I will go ahead and change or implement my own features in the child class. Okay, so see here, I will write a validate method action mapping HTTP servlet request. Okay, okay, now 1 second. So this is a predefined method given to us. Okay, now the next thing. Hmm, in this validate method, the return type is an object of type action errors. Okay, I will let me create that one. So if the return type is string, you will return a string object. If the return type is int, you will return an int type value, right? If it is an action errors, I will try to send back action errors here. Okay, so I say let me create an object for that action errors err equal to new action errors. Okay, and the next thing that I will do here is let me create something called as, let me do some validations. Do you remember in our old project we did some validations like null check, if the size is less than 0, all those validations we did, right? The same kind of validations I will try to do here. So I say if, so now before I write a statement at line number 35, a quick question to everyone. I want to get the username and password at line number 35. How can I get them? Think before you answer. Anyone? Mapping, I guess, is wrong. Answer is very simple. Exactly, very good, Vikas. The answer is from the getter method. The basic scenario team. Yeah, I already told that the request comes here and whatever parameters or whatever values which are coming from the UI will be attached to this username and password. So if I say get username, okay, I will get the username. I need not go back and do request dot get attribute of uname, something like that. I need not do that. Since the data is already bound to these properties by the struts framework, I can just directly say get username. Okay, so if I say if the get username is equal to null, or I can say get username is equal to blank or empty, then I can say I will add some error message. I will write that, just a second. In a, I'll write that in a while. If get password equal to null, or get password equal to blank, I will write some error messages. So for creating some error messages, there are certain tags that I need, action message tags. Okay, so for time being, let me do one thing. Let me just copy some code from somewhere else, like some property. Okay, let me not do that copy. Let me create it. Instead of using multiple things, let me just use some simple scenario. So for that, what I will do here is I will add some messages. I say err, uh, when will I come to line number 36? I will come to line number 36 only if any of these conditions satisfy. Okay, so which means an invalid data scenario, or uh, let me say that err dot add, see action errors add method. Here I need to add a string. I can add a string called username, comma, means whatever statement or syntax I'm writing here, It's a standard statement, not to worry about this even if you don't understand this. This is nothing but an error object, which is nothing but an add method. Do you remember when we uh, uh, created some examples of collections framework in a list? What I did, list dot add off, and I added some values. In the same way, if it is a map, I wrote a key value pair, right? Now this is also a kind of a map where this is the key and this is the value that I'm adding. So the value will be retrieved from somewhere else. I will explain that. So new action message, and here let me write a tag. So whatever I'm going to write here might not be very clear for you. I will explain this once I create something else called a dot properties file. Okay, I will explain that dot properties file. So here I will say error dot username field. Okay, error dot password field, and here I say password. Yeah, null and blank. So sometimes what happens is whenever you don't enter some data, it will be shown as blank. Null means if it is not yet initialized. Okay, so if suppose if these properties like the get password or get username, if the struts framework fails to add, or if the struts framework fails to bind the data, then since we did not initialize them, it would be null. Actually, get username would be null. But if on the screen, on the front end, on the browser, if I don't enter anything, I just leave an empty space and send it, then it would be a blank space. Okay. Now, so in both the scenarios, I'm adding some error. Okay, err.add. I'm just adding some error. So which means that the concept is very simple. If there are any errors, I will store all the errors in this object, err object. And the last thing that I do here is return. I will just send back err. Okay, so what is that I'm trying to do here? I'm trying to do a data validation here. So who is validating the data? We are trying to validate the data based on whether, means these are the basic scenarios that I'm taking. You can add multiple things, and if there are errors, all the errors are added back into the action errors object. Now the most important configuration. Once I add all the errors into this ERR, what will happen next? Okay, so for time being, just understand that if suppose if there are any errors, okay, my first question to everyone: if there are any errors, should the control go to the login action class? Yes or no? If there are any errors. Very good. The answer is no, which means since there are errors, there is no point in going ahead with this request. Okay. So we need to send back an error to the user. So we will return back that error object. And my question to everyone, to which page the user must be redirected back? What is the name of the page? Any guess? Anyone? Very good, exactly. The user must be redirected back to login.jsp page. Okay. So see here what I am trying to write. Some configurations here. The configuration that I am trying to write is input equal to, okay, the tag that I am using is an input tag, say slash login.jsp. So the meaning of this tag that I wrote here is nothing but, hey, if there are any validation errors, go to this login.jsp page. Then the next scenario, understand, if all the validations are successful, then go to this login action page. Clear? where to go and how they are going. Now, very good. Now the next scenario. The next scenario is when a request comes, not every time you want to validate the data. Okay, not every time you want to validate the data. So you want to control when to validate the data and when not to validate the data. So see here, I'm just using one more tag here. Understand very carefully. I'm saying a tag called validate equal to true. Okay, I'm using a tag called validate equal to true. When I say validate equal to true, it means, hey, go to this form, which is nothing but the login form, and call the validate method. And if I say validate equal to false, it means don't validate the data, which means don't call the validate method in the login form. Now, is it clear like when this line number 32 will be called and in which scenario it will not be called? Okay. If so, if that is clear, tell me the answer. Based on the configurations that I did at line number 20, will the validation happen or not? Excellent. The answer is no. It will not validate the data. Yes, that is a mandatory attribute. So if I say if I don't write validate equal to true, okay, if I don't write validate equal to true, by default, it will never ever validate the data, which means by default, it will consider the validate equal to false. But now, since I am trying to send some login data, I must validate my data. So I say validate equal to true. So only in this context, the data will be validated. Okay. Now, the next scenario that I'm going to explain here is I will try to bind this flow one after the other, and I will try to show you that when I enter valid data, this sysout will be printed in the console, but when I don't enter valid data, this sysout will never be shown. Okay, that is what we will be looking here now. And I will place a debug point here at line number 34. Oh, okay, okay. There is one more configuration that we need to do here, team. That is nothing but the property file configuration. And do you remember, like I said that error dot username field. This is what I told, right? So these configurations basically are nothing but the values that are being read from a common location. Why? Because let us assume that there are 100 pages in your application. In that 100 pages, there might be location where you might be using the username in 10 forms like login form, register form, then user address form, then modify user address form, like that. There are some 10 places where you are using the same field like username. And if you want to display the same error message across the application, sometimes different developers developing the different code might write in different styles, which means that when I say someone, hey, display a message saying that invalid data, someone will say invalid data like this, someone will say all small invalid data like this, someone will say invalid data, someone will say like this, someone will say invalid data, or someone might say invalid data. So they might display data in different formats. Why? Because if there are multiple, in a real time, multiple developers will be developing the project. So someone might have a style of developing the code like this, someone might have a style of developing the code like this. So instead of doing all these things, if I want to streamline a process and say that, hey, I will place all these things at one common location. So if anyone who wants to show some error messages to the user, go go to that file, read the error messages and display that in all the pages. So what I will do, in some location I will say that invalid data. This is what I say. So in all the 10 pages, users will use the same thing. So it would be consistent across my application. And tomorrow, if the company comes and says that, hey, change the use error messages to all caps. So I say I'll change in one location in the file like this, so that in the entire application, in all the 10 pages, it will automatically get reflected. I need not go back and change. Okay, let's see that scenario. So for that, we need to read it from a properties file. So I say package form dot easy easy learn java dot property files, say finish, and create new untitled text file. This is what I select. Okay, so once I select this untitled text file, so what I will do is, like, I will try to save it as dot properties so that it can be stored. I can write some properties in that. Okay, I'll give some space, say control S. I would like to store it in first struts project, under source, under com, under easy learn java, under property files. This is where I want to store it, and the exact name that I want to give is message dot properties. Hit enter. Now here, the code that I'm trying to write here is, this is the code that I write. Here I can write invalid data entered for username field. Error dot invalid data entered for password field. Okay, so now here, means a simple scenario I'm explaining here once again, team. Let us assume that you are doing some validations. Okay, let me do one thing. Let me first explain this flow and then explain the rest of the scenarios there. Okay, now the first thing that I wrote here is, I'm trying to add a key value paid scenario here. That is the one that I told. The highlighted part is nothing but a value. So now I will explain you how this new action message and error.username field, how this configuration will go to the dot properties file and will read the dot properties file. Why? Because it needs to know from where exactly it must read that data, right? Then you might get a doubt how exactly it will go to that properties file only, and how will it read. And before I explain that, if you understand the concept of uh, I'm sorry, resource bundle. In our previous projects, we saw something called as a resource bundle. Anyone remember what is that resource bundle and why did we use it? Exactly, very good side. So in order to read a dot properties file, we used a resource bundle. So let me check star util. Hmm, yeah, DB connection from Java. This is the class in our previous example. I just want to show this. So here, and maybe in this context I would like to show one more functionality. Do control shift R in Eclipse, and I want to search for that file which I'm looking for right now. And initially I thought that the file name had a keyword called util. So how I searched was star util util, but it did not work out. Star util star did not work out. Then I thought it might have data. I searched with star data, it did not work. Then I said star db, then it showed star db connection from Java. So for file searching in real time in an application, there might be hundreds of files. So you can use these kind of shortcuts to go back and search And while searching, just make sure that you append a star and star beginning and at the end, so that it can give any combinations of files with those kind of names. Okay, just one more useful functionality. So now, in the previous example in yesterday's and day before yesterday's classes, we saw that resource bundle is one such configuration where it can go ahead and read a dot properties file by default when I give the name as db parameters, which means I just need to give the file name without the dot properties. So what I did here is, like, I gave this db parameters, and then the next concept here is the resource bundle rs object will be able to go and read all the keys and will give the values for us, right? Now the same concept holds good here. The action messages also reads a dot properties file, but how will an action message know that it must exactly go and read a message dot properties file which is present in this package? So that is what we need to configure in the struts config file. Let me do Control Shift F for formatting this code. Okay, done. The next step that I'll be writing here is regarding the properties file. So regarding the properties file, I say there is a tag which is given called message resources. So message resources, it is asking to enter me some value for parameter property. So here I say com dot easy learn java dot property files dot message. That's all. See here, one more scenario that I would like to explain here is, you need not give the entire file name with the extension. Just give message. It will understand that you are trying to read a dot properties file when you configure it in this tag. Okay. Now we told the action servlet. Okay, so once we write some configurations in this, who will read these configurations? The configurations will be read by the action servlet. Now the action servlet, whenever it looks for these kind of things, it will clearly understand that, okay, I have a properties file, let me go to that properties file and search for a property called error.username field. So it comes to this file and it figures out that, okay, this is the error.username field, which means that this is the value that I need to give back to the user. Okay, so is it clear how the error messages are being stored at a common location and how they are being picked up whenever it is required? Okay, awesome. Now let me run this, not run, debug this. I place the debug point here at line number 34. Well and good in login form.java. Okay, let me say debug as debug on server. Say finish and restart it. Okay, the server has started and I'm able to hit this one. Now before, okay, let me say Raghu secret. Now the server is in debug mode. Good. Now first question to everyone. I'm not considering any configurations or anything right now. My only question here is, there are two Java files in this current flow, login action.java, login form.java. So from now onwards, I will call them as action classes and model classes or form classes. Now my question is, as and when I hit submit here or log into my app button, to which class the control will go first? Someone says form. What about others? Someone says form. Okay. What about others? Very good. The answer is form class. So now if you understand how exactly it goes to form class, in the config file I wrote that, hey, please validate the incoming request. That is what I wrote. So since I wrote validate equal to true, it will invoke this form, which is nothing but the form which I wrote at line number 11, okay, which is nothing but the login form. So it will invoke this login form's validate method. Okay, let me go back and hit submit. Did you see here? It came to the validate method in the login form.java. Now, the first thing that you need to observe here is, okay, before I execute next things, as and when the request came here, the struts framework has already bound the parameters that I have entered in the UI to this data. So if I hover my mouse on username property, you will be able to see that the username property will show the value as Raghu, which I entered in the browser, and the password is nothing but secret again, which I have entered in the browser. So the data is already bound to this one. Okay, now the second step. Here I'm trying to validate the data. Okay, uh, let me do one thing. Okay, uh, let's see a happy path first. When I say happy path, it means that everything will go fine, go smooth. Okay, now line number 36 and line number 40 will never ever give any errors for me. Why? Because this is a valid data that I had entered. So how many errors will be there by the end of this validate method? How many? Will it be 0, 1, 2, 3? Very good. The errors will be 0 errors. So let me execute this. No errors, no errors. Now if you see the errors object, see here in the errors object, the count is 0, which means there are no errors, which means all the data that I have entered is valid as per the current business requirements. And the next requirement is, if the data is valid, the user can be taken to the action class. Okay, so now since the validate equal to true is done, the action servlet figures out that, hey, there are no errors. So the action servlet now will call the login action class. Now see here, as and when I click F8 or this green symbol, the control will immediately come to line number 17. Notice here. Did you notice that the request immediately came to line number 17? Since it is a happy path, all the data is valid, it executes and it goes back. Okay, done. It prints in execute method. Well and good. Now let me explain the next scenario. Okay, so now what I will do is I will enter username, but I will not enter password. Okay, in this current context, we are not going anything deep into JavaScript or anything, but we will be looking how the server side validations are working. Okay, so let me hit enter or log into my app. Okay, now this is a negative flow that we are trying to understand. Now if I go back and hover my mouse on username and try to see the data, username is Raghu, good. The password, if you notice, the password is empty. It did not populate anything in the password. Okay, why? Because I just sent an empty password here. Now the first one, get username. Are there any errors in username? No, there are no errors. But what about the get password? The get password, this scenario is true. So if I select that one and say Control Shift I for inspect, if I inspect it, it shows it is false. Okay, it should be true, right? One second. Equal to. Okay, I'm not sure why it is showing false. Something wrong, but I will look into that. But see here, since the get password is empty, it entered this line number 41. Okay, it entered line number 41 and it is registering something like it is storing an error here. Now if I say this, notice here in the error object in the current scenario, if you notice clearly, the I count value is 1. Okay, when I say the I count value is 1, it means there is an error in the current scenario, which is nothing but the password has failed. Now my next question to everyone, since there are errors, will the control go to the action class or not? Very good. It will not go. Next question. Where will the control go? Means let's not worry about message.properties. Message.properties that and all are is internally read. Okay. But not to message.properties. I want a bigger picture. Login form wrong. Okay. Let me give a hint to everyone. The hint is at line number 20. Very good. It is going back to login.jsp. Understand the scenario team. If it is a happy path, which means if all the data is valid, then go to login action class. Next, when there are errors, take the user back to a specific page which is configured in the tag called input. So in the input tag, I had configured something called as login.jsp. So take the user back to login.jsp. Now if I say, or if I complete my execution F8, see here, did you notice I came back to my login.jsp page itself. The control did not go anywhere. It just came back to login.jsp itself. Okay. Now the next scenario that we need to understand here is, hey, whenever the request comes back from the server, how exactly I can display error messages here? See, everyone understood that it went to the server and came back to login.jsp page itself. But if you don't display any message there or any error message, the user will not understand it clearly, right? So now we will write some message or we will display some error messages in the JSP page so that it can show what exactly is the error coming from the server. Okay. Now see here, in the login form, all the errors are placed in this object, ERR object. So what happens in the background is, in the background, the Struts framework will send this error object to the page which is configured in the input tag, which is nothing but it will be sending the object to login.jsp, and on and in login.jsp page we need to know how to configure or how to write some configurations so that I can go back and display those messages automatically. When I say automatically, it means by taking the help of the struts given tags. How can I do this? Okay, so it's very simple. See here, see the tag that I'm trying to use. So maybe let me make it more meaningful. So I say div style, style equal to, 1 second, let me check that, style equal to color colon red. Yeah, that is correct. Okay, div, and here I will write that property. So I say html colon. Okay, before I write this tag, whatever tag I just wrote at line number 18 is a pure HTML tag which will uh, display the message in red color. Okay, I just gave a style to the data that I'm going to print, and whatever data that I'm going to print, I will be doing it with the help of the struts given tag. See the struts given tag that I'm trying to use. I say HTML colon errors. Okay, I will display the HTML colon errors. If I just leave HTML colon errors, it will display all the errors here itself. Username errors, password errors, any other errors, it will display there itself. But what I say here is, again, the property that I'm trying to use is username property. Okay, the same thing. What I will do here is, here I say password property. And if you go back and look into the login form.java, in login form.java, the key that I'm giving here is username, and here the key that I gave here is the password. So the username and password are basically the keys that I'm trying to use on the JSP page. So if I go to my JSP page, I'm telling username here, password here, which means any errors which are coming for the password will be displayed here, and any errors for username will be displayed here. Okay, so let me go back and try to run or rerun the same thing. Okay, log into my app. It failed, and the error count is 1, which means there is one output or one failed property. So if I complete it, it goes back to the login.jsp. Notice here it shows invalid data entered for password field. So now let me remove this Raghu also and send the request. Log into my app. I'm just completing the request, and I will come back to my page. So do you notice here it shows invalid data entered for username. So is it clear to everyone like how I can display the error messages without writing a lot of code that we saw in JSP project in our previous scenario? Clear to everyone? Okay, awesome. Any doubts till this point? Okay, very good. And again, I'm just reiterating the same old concept. Whatever concept that we saw here is very, very simple, straightforward. What is that? Send the data. If it is valid, go ahead and process it. If it is invalid, send back the error message. Apart from that, there is nothing else we do in Struts or in any other project, okay, or in any other framework. That's the basic concept. Means on top of this, there are lot many concepts that we try to add on, but this is the basic flow. This is the basic understanding that you need to have. Okay. Now taking this to the next level, let us assume that everything is good. Okay, so now we understood how the flow goes and all, and how to display the error messages back, all that stuff and all we understood. Now the next scenario that I would like to present here is how I can go to the action class and process the data from there onwards, which means I enter username Raghu and password as secret. How can I go to talk to how can I go to the database, talk to the database and get back the stuff and all that scenario? Okay, that is what I want to explain here now. So for that, let me create one more class, or else let me first go to the login action class. Okay, I'm closing login form. Everyone knows what is login form. Now I'm going closing. Oh no, we need the config file, so I'll not close the config file. I'll close the register action. The message dot properties I will close for now, and the login dot JSP also I will close. So there are only three files. Web.xml also we don't need now, so I'll close it. So all I need is login action dot Java right now. Okay. Now the most important thing, the request came to the server and it came to loginaction.java. So once it came to loginaction.java, all you can do is you can retrieve the data for us. Okay. Now, question to everyone. Once the request comes to the execute method, from where exactly I can get the username and password? from REQ. Okay, very good. So the scenario here is, if you understand the concept, every time a request comes to this class, it calls the execute method. Well and good. Now it is clear that it calls the execute method. Now if you see the parameters of the execute method, what exactly Struts framework told is, hey, I will give a Struts approach and I will keep the traditional approach also for you. Okay, so what is that? Struts approach and traditional approach. Two approaches are given here. What is the struts approach? Okay, let's first see what is the traditional approach. So before I show the traditional approach, let me go back to a file called login app. So in the login app, which is our old project, okay, in that project, if you notice here, okay, if you notice here, it shows the do post method where I am saying that request dot get parameter of username and request dot get parameter of user password. This is how I am retrieving the data. Now 1 second, first steps project. So here I say localhost 8080 slash, okay, or first steps project. What happened to install the server? No. Oh, first struts proj itself. Okay, see this. So when I go to view page source, and the name it is giving is username, and the password it is giving is password itself. This is the HTML view of the page that I have created. And if I go back, okay, if I go back to this page, in my login action, I'm going back to my struts project again. In my struts project, what I can do is I can use the traditional approach and say request. Okay, I do already have a request object which is available. Request dot get parameter of username and password, like how I did here. Okay, so in the login action dot java also, I can say request dot get parameter of username and request dot get parameter of password. I can do that. But the first thing that you need to understand here is we will not use a traditional approach. We will use the approach which Struts has given us. Okay, so what did Struts give? Struts told that, hey, the data is already bound to an action form. Okay, it is already bound to an action form, which is nothing but the login form. And the next thing is the data is already validated. So at any point of time, you try, if you want to get the data, please get the data from the action form, which is nothing but the login form. Okay, so from here you need to get the data. So uh, whatever I'm going to explain next is one such part where many people try to explain, want me to re-explain, or that is one part where many people will not understand it so clearly. Okay, but the concept is very simple. I'm trying to use the concept of inheritance or a hierarchical concept here. Okay, so what is the parameter that I have here? The parameter that I have is an action form. Okay, action form is a parameter that I have. Now, first answer my question. In this current project, are there any classes that are inheriting from action form? If so, how many classes are there and what are they? Okay, so login and register, login action. Okay, Ravi, the answer is wrong. Padma, the answer is wrong. And Sai, I'm not sure like whether you wrote the correct names or not. So the answer is wrong for you also. I want the exact name of the classes. If the exact name that you say is login and register, that's wrong answer. So if so let me explain that. My question is, are there any classes in the current project which are the children of action form? Okay, very good side, good answer. The answer is login form and register form. So what is the highlighted part here? In the execute method, action form is the highlighted part. Now, if you go back to login form extends action form. The register form extends action form. Okay. So now, in this current context, in this current context of execute, when I say action form, what is the form that I am referring to in this context? Everyone. Okay, the answer is login form. Okay, it's not the two forms. The answer is only login form. Okay, so whenever the execute method is called, okay, whenever the execute method is called, one of the input to this execute method is an action form class, and this execute method is in login action. Understand the statements that I'm going to make right now. Okay, very clearly. When the request comes to login action, okay, when the request comes to login action, the struts controller, which is nothing but the action servlet, will decide which data it needs to send to this action class. Okay, what is the data it needs to send? It knows that the data that it needs to send is coming from login.jsp. Now, is the data coming from login.jsp, is it is the action servlet saving the data in any of the forms? Okay, answer my question. Is the data coming from login.jsp, is it being saved in any of the forms in the current project? If so, in which form? Very good. The data coming from the login.jsp is being saved in the login form. So now what exactly the action servlet will do is, okay, I do have multiple forms in my project, but still when login comes, the data is present in login form. So when I go to the login action class, and when people talk about action form, in which means I need to send login form only. Now, my next question. If I go to register action, in this scenario, when I say action form, okay, understand my question and answer it carefully. When I say action form, how will the action servlet decide which form to send based on what configurations? Where the corresponding JSP is saving, that's correct, but that's not the right answer. Let's look at here. The right answer is, when login comes, this action class needs to be, means I'm going back to my struts-config.xml page. In my struts-config.xml page, we have configured something like action mapping tag. In the action mapping tag, I wrote what is the action. The action is login, the path is login, and this is the class that needs to be called. And if you notice here, I am binding a form called my own login form, which is nothing but this login form, right? So when the action servlet calls this action class, it will send this form only to login action. And if I want to send something else to register action class, to this class, so what I say here is, I say name equal to custom register form. So now when the action servlet calls this action class register action, then it will pass the register form object only. Clear? Yes or no? Why? Because this is one part I know that for sure everyone will ask me like, hey, what is this? What is this action form? So that is the reason why I'm trying to stress upon more at this point. What is this action form? Is that clear? Can I get an yes or no from everyone? Ravi, Vikas, Padma, Azim. Okay, that's good. Now, the next scenario that I need to do here is I need to typecast it. The most important thing. Why? Because the form is in which what type the form is of action form type. So I will convert it to login form. So I know that login form is what I need to use. Login form ls equal to typecasting to login form, and I say form. Control shift O to import login form. Okay, it is imported at line number 11. Okay, at line number 11 it is imported, and see here the form that is present in the execute method is exactly the same thing that I am using here, and I am typecasting. I am converting that form into the login form object. So the next step that I am going to do here is, see here, the next step that I'm going to do here is just let me do a sysout and say lf login form dot get username sysout get password. Okay, now one more question to everyone. Once the request comes to line number 20, 22 and all these things, do I need to validate the data here? Yes or no? Very good. The answer is no. Why? Because whatever data that came here is already validated in the login form.java's validate method. Okay. So only once the data is validated, it comes here. Okay. Now let me just go back and quickly, I'm just going to run it once again. I'm not going to. Okay. Okay. I got you, Ravi. Maybe if you want more explanation on this, what I would prefer you to do is like, I would prefer you to go back and see the concept of inheritance, where we saw an example of shape class and some related child classes. So that is the concept of inheritance. So what exactly is form? Form is of type action form. Okay, action form is the parent and the login form is the child. So I'm trying to convert this form object into a login form object. Okay, I'm not sure if I can present it in a much better way rather than this. uh, why? Because like you need a little bit of understanding on the concepts of inheritance to understand this typecasting scenario. So form is in the type of parent here. The parent is being converted into an appropriate child. Okay. Yeah, that's very good side. We cannot convert parent type to child. Huh? We cannot convert parent type to child. That is why we are doing it. Okay, okay, no, no. I think the statement that you wrote here is a little bit confusing. We cannot convert parent type to child. That is okay. The answer here, Sai, here is we can convert parent to child. We can. That is the reason why I am casting it to 20. If I cannot cast it, it will show a compilation error. The other thing is you cannot do the other way around. You cannot convert the login form to action form. You cannot do that. But you can convert an action form to login form. Okay. The first thing that you need to understand here is this is an action form. But what exactly the action servlet will send here? The action servlet, based on the configuration that we did at line number 20, the action servlet, when it calls the login action, it will send this object, login form object. So we need to typecast, okay, we need to typecast this action form into login form. Okay. Now notice here very carefully. When I go to register action, okay, I went to register action. What will the action servlet do? The action servlet will look at the configurations at line number 23 and it will say that, okay, now I need to send a register form. Okay, I need to send a register form to register action.java. That is what it thinks. And once it comes to register action, the form needs to be converted into register form. Rh equal to register form of FORM form. Control Shift O to import the register form, which is in a different package. So it is done. And see here, I am typecasting the parent into the child. Clear? Okay. So let me debug it and show you. Debug as debug on server. Save finish. Restart. I'll remove the breakpoint at login form. We don't need this login form since we understood this. I'm removing this breakpoint. So straight away, once I click on the submit button, the request directly comes to this log, means the control directly comes to login action. It will not stop in the login form. So I say Raghu secret, hit enter. So now did you notice here data came, the username is Raghu and the password is secret. Okay, so I complete the execution. So clear, clear to everyone. Now the next and the most important thing, and uh, one of the final concepts in this flow, means after this flow the rest everything is basic method calls only. So one of the major configurations that I'm going to explain here right now is, once it is success, okay, once let us assume that we are only talking about a happy path. Okay, so all the validations are correct and the user has entered valid credentials only. Now once the user has entered valid credentials, I need to take the user back to some success page, right? So I will create a page, I will create a JSP page and I will say login success.jsp. So successfully logged in using Struts app. Okay, so now what I want to do here is I will configure something which will take you to login success page. So let's understand that. What is the return type of the execute method? The execute method return type is action forward. So now whatever statement that I'm going to write here is a standard set of statement. Okay, so return, the first thing is mapping. Do you see here an action mapping object which is given at line number 16? So let me use that object, mapping dot find a forward and a string that I will write here. The string that I will write here is success. Okay, the string that I will write here is success. So as and when I write this string called success, what will happen is the string will be returned back to Excuse me. Let me do one thing here. Uh, First, let me go ahead and configure. Then once I configure, I will go back and explain that configuration, and then we will see like how exactly that configuration is being called and all. Okay. So now inside the action tag, see here, the action tag is being closed at line number 22 and it is opened at line number 19. So in between these tags, I'm opening one more tag called forward, and the name that I'm giving here is success. CPS success, and the configuration that I'm writing here is path equal to slash login success.jst. Okay, this is what I write here. Now Control Shift F to format it. Just okay, formatting is done. Now what happens is, if you understand the flow, mapping is an action mapping object dot find forward. There is a, these are all predefined methods, team. See here, what exactly the find forward method is giving back. The find forward method is giving back an action forward object for us. Okay, an action forward. So what is the return type of this execute method? Action forward. So we are able to get that action forward method, action forward object, and I'm saying success in this. So when I say success, it will return back the request to the action servlet. The action servlet will look for a tag called forward, and in that it will look for this name, this exact name called success. Okay, so it will take this success, go to the config file. In the config file, it will go for look for this forward tag with that exact name called success. When that matches, it will take the user to login success.js. I will say run as, sorry, debug on server one last time. Say finish. So I will say, I will hit enter, log into my app. So once I hit enter, it came here. It came here. It came login success dot. It says that mapping dot find forward, and it says success. And once it says success, then what happens is success means, for time being, what I would like to say here is, it will return back a string, but don't consider it as a string. An action forward object is returned. So in that action forward object, it will find for this success. So once the request is given back, the request comes to here and it will look in this forward tag. Okay, it meets the success and it will go to this page. And like this, you can configure multiple things. Oh, sorry. If it is a failure, then go to login. Like this, you can write as many configurations as you want. So like that, once I do that, so successfully logged in using Struts app. So we went to the success page. Okay, is that clear to everyone, like what we did? Okay, that's good. So any doubts? Means there is still more which we need to add to this, which we'll look in tomorrow's class. So any doubts or any questions before we wind up in today's class? Okay, that's good. I'm just stopping the recording.